The floor is yours, Ersin.
Thank you very much, Sam. Thank you everyone for tuning in and for being so patient as well whilst we were dealing with that technical glitch. I also want to thank Ken and wish him a happy birthday, and of course Sam as well, for inviting me along to speak and for organising this seminar series, that is taking place of the conference that couldn't happen because of the lockdown and the restrictions. I'm sure all of you who are tuning in will agree that events like these are really, really crucial for maintaining that really important sense of community and for enabling us to share our knowledge and passion of and for research that really draws us together. So really, thank you for this opportunity. Before very briefly outlining what this paper is going to address, I'd like to dwell for a few moments on Cyprus as a landscape and use this as an opportunity to raise some really crucial points about the identity and status of this island in the Eastern Mediterranean. And this will really set the scene and provide us with that all-important framework so that we can start thinking about why it's so important to engage with collections of artifacts from Cyprus that are held in museums such as the Egypt Centre and of course the Swansea Museum as well. So to get us kick-started, I just want to show you some images here. One, we've got a map of Cyprus itself with its principal sites, its key hubs and settlements. This really sort of captures the settlements of the island that are really important in the Hellenistic and Roman periods. And this is, of course, surrounded by some of its key sites here, and I'll talk about those in a moment. Now, Cyprus is a wonderful but problematic landscape to inhabit, whether this is done professionally or personally. First of all, because of its geopolitical location, its abundance of natural resources, and its position at a vantage point, a stepping stone if you want, between the East and West. It has rendered itself, it has long been recognised as a cultural melting pot. Really, it is a truly dynamic landscape, more than able to drive and negotiate its culture and identity via the exploitation of its abundant natural resources and its position. But being an island, paradoxically, while it's always going to afford its inhabitants these opportunities through its connectivity, through its resources, and by being able to connect with multiple landscapes around it, it also renders it very vulnerable to the sort of whims of outsiders. So it's always fated to be conquered, and this is something that's very key to all kinds of narratives that surround the island. So the themes of conquest, sale, possession, and colonialism are really integral to the island's history from antiquity to the present day. And this map that you can see on the screen here hopefully highlights this. You can see the settlement of its sort of major sites around the coastline, depicting this sort of coastal existence with its, exploitation of its harbours and the development of sort of key hubs that are integral to lots of trade routes in the region. You can also see on this map the huge expanse, the Troodos Mountains, this large ophiolite in the south of the island, which renders the island as a really mineral-rich landscape. And this is predominantly where copper comes from. This is the word for which the island gets its name, and it's something that the island is particularly associated with through its mythology and through its physical landscape, and has made it infamous from antiquity. Second of all, so that's the first point, but second of all, when we think about literary accounts and historical descriptions of the island that have survived from antiquity, there are a few things to note. First, they are few, but more importantly, they are written by outsiders. So from the offset, from at least the 8th century BC onwards, when we have the first sort of written works coming about, traditions and concepts of Cypriot identity, history and experience are constructed by outsiders, not by insiders. And this is something that has shaped the influence and transmission of ideas about Cypriot identity, Cypriot history, and the status of the island more generally since antiquity. And again, there are echoes of this that we can see in a whole range of works leading up to the present day. So again, on this slide surrounding the map, you can see a snapshot of some key sites. You've got the infamous sanctuary of Aphrodite Paphia at Paphos. You've got Kurion and Amathus just underneath, so you can see that they have these expansive views of the sea as they are sort of situated quite high up on the coast. And then at the bottom left, you've got a section of the impressive baths and gymnasia of Salamis with its statues there. And these images are really to impress upon anybody who is interested in engaging with this landscape, that really it is so important to have material culture, objects, and an appreciation of the landscape at the heart of your studies, to really get to grips with how we can tell and sort of understand the history and the experience of the inhabitants of this island from the perspective of those who inhabited it. So not those tales that are told to us by outsiders. We have to take a material culture and object focused approach to really get to grips with what is going on in this landscape. So that's something that is really important to highlight as well. So everything about this island, from its geopolitical location, the history of its excavation, the way in which it is written about by the ancients and modern historians, or in modern discourse, and the way in which its material culture has found its way into museums across the world, has rendered it, you know, a really interesting but problematic landscape. And it's one that has traditionally been considered in people's conscience as being on the fringes, on the edge of, you know, empires, or on the edge of whether it's the Roman Empire or sort of modern sort of engagement with it as well. So more than ever, it is important for all of us to invite ourselves into this space, for me to invite you all into it as a Cypriot, as a person who focuses on this as an area of research, and for you all to come in as well and to look at the Mediterranean world with Cyprus at its centre. It's the hub, and we're going to look outwards. So it's really important to do this. So let's have a shift of perspective, and this is a really fantastic landscape to do this. And I'm pleased to say that this is something that I can really do easily here at Swansea, because of the brilliant and genuine work that my colleagues in the department and here at the Egypt Centre do, engaging students and wider audiences with a broad spectrum of ancient landscapes. So for us, the ancient world, it isn't just the traditional Greece, you know, Greece and Rome. We look beyond that, and we stand in these corners and we make them the centre, and we sort of build pictures from different perspectives, and it's a wonderful thing to be able to do. So this brings me to the focus of this paper and what I'm going to do for the remainder of the talk. When I arrived at Swansea, I have to admit I was completely bowled over by the Egypt Centre, and when I heard that it had a small, if what, eclectic collection of Cypriot artefacts, I knew that this was something that I wanted to investigate further. I mean, come on, you know, we've got artifacts and objects from one pocket of the Mediterranean finding their way to Swansea. What is the story here? How can we tell this? How can we bring this alive? This is something that I knew I wanted to get involved in. The other thing to really emphasize is that we really should never underestimate the power of collections in local museums, such as the ones held at Swansea in the Egypt Centre or in the Swansea Museum, and what they can tell us about links and sort of different connections that we can make with other institutions locally and globally, and what it tells us about the academic landscape at key points. So we're talking here about the late 19th to early 20th centuries. This is something I think that has really been emphasised wonderfully in the papers that have been part of this series, particularly in Martina's paper this week and in Carolyn's paper not so long ago. When we look at how such collections were acquired, it tells us something about academic interests, networks, colonial activities, in this case Cyprus, and allows us to link these collections with different people and other institutions across the world as well as locally. More than this, it's an important opportunity for us to think critically about sort of scholarship during this period, and ensures that we do not take local and global histories and how they're formed and written for granted, but it also brings a range of artifacts that are often unknown or overlooked to the attention of a wide range of audience. And this is certainly true for the Cypriot diaspora. And this is a term that's often sort of attached to these odd small collections that find their way from Cyprus in local museums. So there's, there is a movement now for a lot more attention to be paid to these. So for this talk, what I'm going to do is just give you an overview of the research aims and what I'm sort of hoping to achieve by working with my colleagues here at the Egypt Centre. So first of all, the key thing is that I want to systematically examine Cypriot artefacts, not just held at the Egypt Centre, but also in the Swansea Museum. And hopefully this will lead to improving the records that we have. So as you'll see, this will result in, let's say, better photographs, updated images that we can use for teaching and engaging wider audiences, improving and enhancing our catalogue entries, and even identifying artefacts that are known to be in the collection but have not been matched up with records that we do have. So, overall enhancing our knowledge of this collection. Again, the second point is to investigate how artefacts came to Swansea and how the collection overall across the two institutions were built. So this is something that is really important to do. Again, this is a really key point, the third part of this research, and something I will tackle towards the end of this paper, is to think about how we can engage a range of audiences with the material and how we can increase access to the collection. And the poll at the very end of this talk is going to be handed over to you to get feedback from you. So I'd really appreciate if you did, if as many of you as possible did engage with this. Now, this paper has these three parts to it, and I must give you a warning that my treatment of some of this is going to be very light touch indeed, certainly because of the challenges that many of us have faced trying to continue research during the pandemic. For example, many archives have closed, many institutions are running on skeleton staff, and one of the things that I need to do, which is physically examine artifacts, has simply not been possible. So there's a lot of things that you're going to hear about that have started, and sort of these initiatives are there and the contact has been made, but the research activity has been sort of scuppered one way or another. But it's all there ready to be picked up again when the time is appropriate. So to kickstart, I'm going to give a little bit of a survey of the types of things that are held in our two main institutions. Now, obviously, this is the Swansea Museum. It needs very little introduction. It's something that I think Carolyn touched upon, if I remember rightly, in the paper that she gave a couple of weeks ago. As we know, Swansea Museum is the oldest museum in Wales, and it is a building that was commissioned by the Royal Institution of South Wales. Now, of its collection, it does hold artefacts from Cyprus. When you look at its website, it sort of briefly makes a mention that there are Cypriot artefacts in there, but there's no way for you to truly get to grips with this using the website. So you have to either physically go into the museum itself or make a direct inquiry regarding the collection. Now, what I have been able to look at during lockdown has been some very light sort of documents that give a summary of what is contained in this collection. And this includes roughly 24 artifacts that are on record, 2 of which contain in the sort of the list, the overview, that they are possibly or probably Cypriot, so at least 22 artifacts. These include a range of things such as earthenware, so we've got sort of very similar looking bowls, jugs, vases, one figurine of an animal that's got a greeny tinge to it, which is thought to sort of emulate the appearance of copper. And then we've got a series of stone weights as well. Again, the dates are very broad. They range from the Bronze Age to the Roman period. So we've got quite a wide coverage of things here. Now, I'm not going to go through all these artifacts systematically because we could be here forever, but I just want to bring up an image, or a slide rather, with two images here to give you an idea of the type of things that we're looking at. Note the fuzzy fuddy-duddy photographs here. These really need photographing again. We really need to update these records and make them so much more attractive and appealing to audiences. So what we have here, typical of the collection, we've got the first item, which is a globular earthenware vessel. It's got one handle, and you can see it's sort of decorated in a very simple fashion with a banded decoration, and it's unglazed. The records tell us that it is collected, or was collected, from tombs around the Nicosia Kyrenia area, so that's central northern Cyprus. Again, we've got a series of loom weights, and this is very typical of those that are held in the museum. It's made of stone, it's got some very simple decoration, and it's thought to have been from the Roman period. So this is very typical of the artifacts that are held in the Swansea Museum. And you can see, unfortunately, why artifacts like this are overlooked and not considered as aesthetically pleasing or as exciting as some of the other sort of star items that get written about or talked about a lot in other collections. But we should never underestimate or overlook these artifacts. When we turn to the Egypt Centre, we find that there's a much more varied range of artifacts in their collection. Again, if you turn to the website, you actually have a better opportunity to engage with what is there digitally, because you can access the catalogue online. But when we look at things in detail, we see that there are actually roughly 16 artifacts on record as coming from, or possibly being from, Cyprus. And this number could increase, because I was made aware this academic year of a collection of unidentified alabastra that is held in the Egypt Centre in countless boxes that need going through. So this number of Cypriot artifacts could certainly increase. And this is something I'll talk about towards the very end of this talk, as it involves some student involvement and getting them working with the collection to develop this research. Again, when we look at the range of artifacts, we've got our earthenware, so a range of flasks, jugs, some figurines, which you'll see in a moment, cosmetic jars, and a marble head. And again, the dating is as broad as it is from the collection held at Swansea Museum. So we've got things from the Bronze Age up to the Roman period. One thing I really must flag, aside from the objects that we have on record, is the donation of roughly 25,000 slides that was made to the Egypt Centre in 2019. Now, this comprises of an incredible range of documents. These are images of sites from across the Mediterranean, the Levant and Egypt. And these were all taken sort of in the 80s, early 90s, possibly the late 70s. And as you can imagine, given the landscape and the focus, a lot of these sites have changed phenomenally since these images were taken. And they provide us with such an important record of these different landscapes. And of course, there are some key images of Cypriot ancient sites. And this is something that Ken and I have started to go through to identify and to start thinking about what we can do with these images. So this is what is contained in the Egypt Centre. Now, I just want to focus on one particular object, which is, I have to admit, my favourite artefact, just to give you an idea of what is held in the collection. So again, we've got a very old fuzzy image from the catalogue. GR1, figure of a man carrying a lamb. Now, this is the wonders of what can happen when you sort of update records, and I have to thank Ken for this. I hope you can see this clearly if I move my screen over there. You can see immediately by just taking photographs, editing the image and sort of presenting it in a much sharper focus and in this manner where you're getting really up close with the object, it really, really brings it to life. And we can start to observe the different features here. And it really is a wonderful little object here. You can see that there are 2 holes near the base, and it looks like the lower part of this artifact has been made by a wheel, a potter's wheel, but the upper part very much looks like it's been handmade. It's dated roughly to the 7th and 8th, the 8th to 7th century BC. And again, these types of figures are found all over, and it's thought that they were either made as votive offerings in temples or put in tombs. And you can see just about the image of the lamb that this figure is holding in his arms. So again, this is the magic of sort of revisiting artifacts, taking photographs of them, updating records, and sort of bringing these objects to life and to people's attention much more. So this is very typical of the type of thing that's held in the Egypt Centre. So how do we get these artifacts moving from Cyprus all the way to Swansea? If I move this, we all know where Swansea is, but I've just put it there so it's clear for you on the map. At first glance, many of the artifacts, as they are listed in the sort of documents that I have been able to look at, they're either without provenance or they are not attributed to a specific collection or an individual. So there's many artifacts that I think are going to require physical searching through the archives rather than just relying on the scant digital resources that I've been able to get hold of so far. That said, there are a number of key names that do pop up though, and these include these figures here. So we've got Colonel William Llewellyn Morgan, who is a very notable local figure. He himself excavated in Cyprus according to notes held by the Swansea Museum, and he was active certainly in and around Nicosia and Kyrenia. So some of these artifacts are sort of specifically noted as finds from his activities in Cyprus in those areas. He was president of the Royal Institute of South Wales for around 16 years. So, he's a really, really well-known local figure. I'm not going to talk about him today because there is plenty of opportunity to do that, and we have ample records to engage with him. Similarly, with the next heavyweight in our list, Sir Henry Wellcome. And again, we heard about him recently in Martina's talk. This is an American pharmacist who was a fervent collector of antiquities, and he's sort of buying up all these different collections at Sothebys. And this perhaps, excuse me, accounts for the, sorry everyone. It accounts for the eclectic nature of the collections here at Swansea. We certainly know from Sothebys' catalogues that he's buying things up from the collections of Francis Wallace Grenfell, Sir Herman Webber, Lawrence Cesnola, and Captain Stott. And these artifacts that are finding their way to Swansea. Again, with regards to the research that I'm doing on how these collections were formed, how they were made, and how they were built over time, I'm not going to talk today about Sir Henry Wellcome or Francis Wallace Grenfell. We heard about him in some talks earlier, nor Sir Herman Webber. We know a lot about these individuals. Instead, I wanted to just focus on Lawrence Cesnola and Captain Stott, because these are the 2 lesser known individuals in this list. And I just thought, if I'm going to get started with researching this, I'm going to tackle the most problematic figures first of all, and then get going from there. So I'll kickstart with Lawrence Cesnola and why this name is so significant and important. So the 2 artifacts that we have from the Cesnola collection came down to Swansea, having been bought at Sotheby's in July 1919. So again, please forgive these fuzzy pictures here. I will make up for them with the next slide. I can assure you I've got a much better picture of one of these wonderful terracotta horses. So GR3, which is the first image, again, we've got a terracotta image, a figurine, which dates from roughly 600 to 500 BC. It's thought to have come from a chariot series, and is quite a cute sort of figurine. It's something that Ken sort of features quite a lot in our open days, and it sort of advertises, because it really is a charming artifact. Again, we've got GR4, which is an animal which has some sort of buffed coloured clay appearance. It's got a handle that appears to be broken at the top, and it's hollow. We don't have a date for this at the moment. But the reason why I want to zoom in on these two artifacts is because of the connection with a major institution across the pond. Now, Lawrence COS NOLA, this name, Lawrence COS NOLA, refers to an individual, Alessandro Palma di COS NOLA. His dates are 1839 to 1914. He was active in Paphos and at Salamis in Cyprus, where he was the US vice consul, and he worked alongside or on behalf of the British government. He excavated extensively but illegally across the island, something that he was eventually arrested for. Now, the reason why this name is so important is that he was the brother of Luigi Palma di COS NOLA. Now, this individual is, again, a real heavyweight in the history of sort of a very early Cypriot archaeology. He was an American-Italian diplomat, and like his brother, he held an administrative post in Cyprus. He was consul from 1865 to 1876, and he undertook widespread excavations across the island. And I say excavations in using air quotes. Essentially, this man was a treasure hunter, and over 11 years, he plundered the landscape for whatever he could get his hands on. And one of the things, he was a bit naughty, one of the things that he did was he really fabricated bundles of collections, because he was trying to emulate and follow in the footsteps of the greats of his day. So the Heinrich Schliemann's, where they're sort of finding the so-called Mask of Agamemnon, that kind of thing. So Luigi Palma di COS NOLA is trying to do this. He's sort of pulling in all kinds of artifacts from different places and making up these fake royal collections. Which obviously presents us today with lots of problems when we're trying to think about the provenance and understand, you know, the history of certain artifacts. He certainly profited greatly from his activities in Cyprus. He published extensively on his finds, where these stories about, you know, what these collections were sort of written, put to paper. But the key thing is that as soon as he left his post in Cyprus, he then became, he accepted in 1877 a place on the board of trustees of the Metropolitan Museum. So he becomes the first director of the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. He holds this post from 1879 to 1904, and his collection from Cyprus, which is vast, becomes one of the foundation collections of this amazing institution in New York. According to one American academic, I think this kind of sums up how many approach COS NOLA and sort of think about his legacy. He remains an albatross about the neck of those American archaeologists who are interested in Cyprus. He is a very problematic figure to engage with. On the other side of the coin, it cannot be denied that this man certainly put Cypriot art on the world stage, and this is something that was achieved via the collection that was taken to New York. So, you know, our two little terracotta figurines here, these animal figurines, we've got this connection from Cyprus, Swansea, and New York. So, you know, we're reaching big here with what we've got in the museum. And again, as promised, we can see the power of just taking some up-to-date images, positioning them so we can see the artifact from all sides, so we can fully appreciate really how this this artifact was constructed and some of its features. So we can see it looks like it's been handmade. We've got sort of these wonky indents all around it, and you can see much clearer the paint and the way in which it has been very simply decorated. So again, images like this, re-engaging with these objects, it's bringing them to life in a way that sort of hasn't been done so before. Now, the other person I briefly wanted to focus on was this Colonel Stott. Okay, so we've got this name, which really isn't much to go on when we're thinking about how we can trace this individual and figure out who they were and what they were doing in Cyprus. So we've got here the Sothebys catalogue here, which tells us that the sale took place in 1920, and we've got the collection here, of which one item I think was bought by Henry Wellcome. So the first place for me to start, because you don't have much to go on with this name, Colonel Stott, is a series of documents, the Cyprus Gazette. Now, this is a wonderful resource. It was published from 1878, and it's still being published today and put together. Until 1960, it was published by the Great Britain Colonial Office, because Cyprus was under colonial rule up until that point. Again, the Gazette contains information regarding the services and activities of Cyprus governmental institutions. To give you an idea, there are roughly 129 editions online from 1878 onwards. The early editions are roughly 100 pages, but by the time we get mid-1880s, they range from 350 to 750 pages long. Trust me, this is painstaking work to scroll through. There's no search facility on these PDFs, so it is a case of sort of painstakingly going through and looking for the key names. Mostly it's dealing with census details, medical practice, containing plagues, cholera, dealing with sort of diseases that are spread amongst animals from village to village, and of course the role that a number of military personnel performed across the island. So as I'm scrolling through, I'm looking for my key names, notably Stott. And just to give you an idea, I've just plucked excerpts from the 1956 edition, so you can see what this can look like. So in the top image, you can see a certain Durrell LG, Director of Public Relations. So this is none other than Lawrence Durrell, the author of the infamous Bitter Lemons of Cyprus. Again, when you scroll through the pages, you see names that are familiar to scholars working on Cyprus. So we've got Megor, who was the Director of Antiquities in Cyprus for a number of years. And again, for some even more sort of context, you find all kinds of sort of odd records that are consistently sort of kept. So again, you can see in the bottom image, it says Antiquities Department, and there are adverts for different vacancies. So it's interesting to get that context and to see what people were looking for, what the roles entailed, and how they were filled and organised and overseen. So this is providing that all-important context for us. So I'm going through the Cyprus Gazette. Meanwhile, I'm emailing colleagues from other institutions who have small collections like ours to see if they're aware of this name, Stott. And as I'm doing this, I become aware of this rather remarkable female collector, Frances Louisa Stott. Now, women sort of benefactresses are quite unusual when it comes to thinking about the collection and the collation of artifacts and how they're donated to different institutions during this time. So now I have a name to go on, and I know that she dies in 1919. So in my head, I'm thinking, oh, 1919, we've got a sale in 1920. This is the way forward. So I know that she travelled extensively with a man named Charles Louis Holland, or Holland as his name is sometimes spelt, and they're travelling around Europe collecting antiquities. Now, I have to say this is quite scandalous because he's a married man and she is not his wife. So, you know, they're causing quite a stir going around collecting antiquities. But she does acquire an impressive collection, some of which she bequeathed to her nephews. So she's got a sister whose sons take on the name of her husband, of course, so they're Smith, so we don't have a lead there. They're not Stotts, but she has a brother, okay? So Mary and Francis have a brother, Samuel Storer Stott, and they are of an engineering company, SS Stott & Co, that are based near Manchester. So I'm thinking, okay, so maybe she bequeathed her artifacts to one of her nephews from this branch of the family. We do know from records that she donated Cypriot artifacts to the Leeds Philosophical and Literary Society Museum during her lifetime. So there's a potential link here. So from here, aside from continuing to look through the Cyprus Gazette, I'm looking at a whole range of different ancestry sort of databases to build up a picture of this family. And this is what we're finding. So we'll ignore, unfortunately, Mary's side of the family, but we've got Frances Louisa Stott, we've got her brother Samuel Storer Stott and his wife, and their 3 children. So we've got Lionel Yates Stott, Dorothy Stott, and Basil Stott. Unfortunately, you can see that Basil dies in service in France in 1916. I've sort of unearthed a few records to confirm that. Dorothy never marries, and I think I found the record that confirms that she lived to quite a grand age, dying in 1973 potentially. So really our candidate here is Lionel Yates Stott. He, again, when we look at the record, remember this sale took place in 1920, and we do have information that he's a military man. But when I dig a little bit more, his time in service is with the Navy. So he's not colonel, he's not going to reach that rank because that just does not feature in the ranks that are possible for someone who engages in a naval career. So unfortunately, that scuppers that. I did write to a friend and colleague who is based in Leeds, who works with this type of sort of research and is more familiar with the life and escapades of Frances Louise Stott. And she confirmed that only to Lionel he was left oil paintings. He wasn't left any of the collection. So we're at a dead end here. So we start exchanging emails, and we go back to the Sothebys entry. And my colleague Anna, I really must thank her for this. She said this is quite an unusual collection when you look at this list of artifacts for sale at Sothebys. The first thing to really note is the language. And she said it's not clear, obviously there's no clear provenance, but this repeated term excavated in Cyprus stands out because it implies that the person who has put this collection together, whether it's Colonel Stott, whoever he may be, or someone working for Colonel Stott, was actually active in Cyprus and had some knowledge of the landscape. Otherwise, the entry would just simply be from Cyprus, okay? So we've got something that's a little bit more specific with the language here. But again, what is noted is that it really is an odd collection of artifacts. It's not a collection for someone who's looking for things that are aesthetically pleasing. It's a very eclectic range here. So the only other candidate that I've started sort of thinking could be a serious contender to sort of match this identity of this elusive Colonel Stott is an individual known as Lieutenant Colonel William Henry Stott. His dates are 1863 to 1930. He was a British Army officer, but he was also a ship owner. So we know that he was made a partner in his father's ship brokerage firm, W.H. Stott & Co. Limited, which managed Stott lines of steamers, and they travelled extensively. And this was something that is sort of making me think, okay, so we've got someone with a military background, and we do have this title of colonel attested, and he's someone whose enterprise means that, you know, he or people on his behalf are traveling around. So the research that I'm doing at this stage is engaging, again, scrolling through the Gazette, looking for Stott, which is taking a long time, but also engaging with different databases to try and see if we can find something that confirms Stott, either his ships or himself, being active in Cyprus or being present there somehow. So that's where I'm at with sort of thinking about these individuals and how they are engaging with the landscape and bringing things back to Cyprus. And as I say, the other 4 major names that were noted on that slide a few slides ago, these are individuals that we really know well and are really well attested and documented in all kinds of different local and sort of more wider records. So my attention at the moment is going on this individual who's lesser known, to try and really get to grips with who this individual was. Now to the third part of my talk, which is a brief overview of what I'm doing and what my colleagues are doing with this collection to try and make it more attractive and bring it to the attention of different audiences here in Swansea. Now, the first place to start is obviously with teaching. My research focuses on ancient Cyprus. So this is something that I am able to offer to my students in the department. At the moment, this is focused on undergraduate teaching, and it's something I embed in a range of modules, but I do have a specific module that is dedicated to the history of ancient Cyprus, and you can see from these slides here. The 2 slides that you can see in the middle are really a summary of the type of the range and the scope of this module to our students. So we're looking at lots of different material artifacts, different landscapes, and thinking about the history of this island from its prehistory, when those people settle for the first time, right up until the modern day. And as you can see, we've got our infamous COS NOLA embedded in the corner of that slide on one of his publications on Cyprus. And in a much later lecture towards the end of the module, we start to think even more critically about different engagement with the island and how different institutions have excavated and how different artifacts find their way in different institutions across the world, and then how stories about the island are told and how we can engage with these collections. So all of this is wrapped up in this module. But there's also a hands-on element. So one thing that I have started doing this year, based on the information from Ken, that we do have some artifacts that have not been sort of matched up and confirmed as Cypriot artifacts in the collection. This involves getting our students to work with us. So I started a workshop that was overseen by Ken in the second term of this academic year, and you can see our students getting to work here. These were weekly sessions that were held, and these were to catalogue alabaster vessels and to try and identify the mysterious Cypriot ones that are held in the Egypt Centre. And you can see from the images, we've got the students using a range of instruments, calipers, measuring tapes, rulers, to measure and identify different parts of these vessels, and then they would match them up using different catalogues and try and sort of rewrite and update the catalogue, the records that we have for the catalogue. So this is really crucial work for our students to help us better understand our collection, but also to give them really important skills as they're engaging with these artifacts hands-on. So these were really important sessions, but unfortunately they were cut short because of the pandemic. So I haven't been able to follow up yet with the students, and we managed to get through a box or 2, but there's still quite a lot to get through for us to conclude this work. The other way of working with the collection and disseminating information to wider audiences is, this is what I call sort of low-level engagement. So we've got things that are being tweeted. Ken is doing a wonderful job, as you can see, rephotographing the artifacts, making them sort of visible. Doing that is just the first really important step. So we've got our Swansea University department account retweeting Ken's tweet here. Again, being invited to speak at events like this and sort of sharing information about the collection, what is there, and sort of asking audiences what is possible, what do you want, what can we do with this collection, is really important to get things going as well. And our department has just set up a YouTube channel where we advertise our different modules, and we are starting to feature videos that will be of interest to different audiences as well as our students. So there's a snapshot, a screenshot, sorry, of just an overview of the module that I have on offer. And I'm sure as time progresses, there's going to be much more Cypriot content on there as well. And I'm sort of starting to think about how I can sort of broadcast this information in different ways to different audiences. So that's where we're at with sort of starting to get different people to engage with this amazing collection. So from here, what I need to do, so with regards systematically examining the artifacts, this of course is going to be continued digitally and when possible through personal inspection of artifacts and archives. So that is really key, and that is obviously something that's out of all of our control at the moment. As I've mentioned at the start of the talk, this will result in better understanding of the artifacts held across the two institutions, and I'm building up a sort of a spreadsheet so I can sort of chart all this information in a systematic and consistent way, so we have a consistent record of these artifacts from both museums. And again, this will lead to better awareness of the collections and individual artifacts that have been previously overlooked or sort of, you know, forgotten about or not even known about by different audiences. Again, this question of how these collections came to Swansea, this remains crucial to shed light on Cyprus's role in the history of empire. Again, it's really important for us to keep talking about this as we dig deeper and think about the activities and the roles and the contributions of these different individuals who are responsible for bringing these collections together and bringing them to places like Swansea. We must scrutinise these and think about how histories of colonised landscapes such as Cyprus are written and presented in print and then presented in museum spaces as well. And of course, this leads to dialogue. It opens up sort of connections and links with different institutions. And this is something that I'm really enjoying, getting in touch with colleagues at different museums and sort of talking with them about this collection that we have here and learning about their collections as well. And again, you know, the final part, how do we engage audiences and increase accessibility to this collection? So you've seen this is done on a very low level through sort of different social media platforms, also by papers such as this that are delivered to specialist and general audiences, but also these initiatives must be informed by our local community. And as I mentioned before, this is going to be something that you can all get involved in by answering the questions on the poll at the very end of the talk. And I would be really grateful for your ideas and for comments and feedback and questions, of course, as well. So I just want to wrap up by saying a few thank yous. So again, first of all, to the Egypt Centre and for Ken for sort of always being ever present and ever helpful and energetic in sort of finding information for me or helping me with certain leads. We've got some archive services here as well to thank, so of course Swansea Museum and the West Glamorgan Archive Service. I must flag up Anna and the wonderful work that she's doing, particularly on the collection that's held in Leeds, and of course colleagues at the British Museum, despite being furloughed, despite having all kinds of limitations. You know, I've got a colleague there who's gone above and beyond and has sent me information and leads as well to follow up regarding our collection here at Swansea. Of course, I can't wait to hear your questions. I look forward to seeing what you guys come up with in terms of feedback from the poll. And you please keep in touch and follow developments by following us, both the Egypt Centre and the department on Twitter, and by engaging with our blogs and YouTube channels. Thank you.